Eyes closed. Who can tell me the 3 points of an iron triangle? Michael?
Department, interest group, and then committee.
Department, interest group, and committee. Perfect. Okay. So you have two that are part of government, and then one that's private. And again, it's the relationship between the three for how stuff actually happens. So the committee, the legislators, the interest group, obviously the focus, and then finally the agency, the government agency. In your case, you said the department or an agency, whatever. So how do they work? This is really where stuff happens. This is where policy is developed, where policy is made, and where it is carried out. So the 3 points work together. But as we were leaving, I said, the example I had up there was tobacco, right? Tobacco farmers, cigarette manufacturers. Well, if there's an interest group promoting a policy with lenient regulations on cigarettes, what inevitably are you going to see on the flip? Somebody who wants stricter regulations. So while an interest group is going to be a part of an iron triangle, it's going to be a little basic at times for us. So we're going to expand on that today. But they are iron. I mean, they're 3 points. It's a triangle. What is true about a triangle? It has 3 sides and 3 points. The strongest shape. You don't get to bend a triangle. It's not like a square where you can bend the angles. Triangles are set, and there's only one way that you can develop the lengths of triangle. They're set, and it's a cool name for them. Iron triangles. This is where government really works, which allows, you got to remember, number one, interest groups. The people who are a part of interest groups, the lobbyists, unfair influence, because the connections are made by the elite lobbyists. Then you have, and I'm not saying elite like money, I'm saying like the lobbyists who have their connections. Then you have the bureaucracy, the agency, the bureau chiefs. They are not elected by the people. Then you only have one person, or one group, I guess, 1 point, that is a part of the public's democracy vote, which would be the legislators. So sometimes it doesn't work. Now, but why, the other side of an interest group is not just one iron triangle or another iron triangle just with an oppositional group. It's a little bit more complicated than that. It becomes a web. It becomes a web, and what we call those are issue networks. And instead of a triangle, it's a web where you have groups all working together over the same issue. So instead of just one interest group, you have the media involved now. You have people who are promoting their purpose. You have many, many interest groups. It's not just one, it's many. So the example I gave yesterday was with Obamacare, right? The iron triangle involved. We said the Committee on Health, the Department of Health and Human Services, and then I think we just said insurance companies was the interest group. Think of all of the interest groups that were involved with Obamacare. You're going to have probably, I'm just thinking, the American Dental Association, the American Medical Association. You're going to have health insurance companies. You're going to have welfare interest groups. You're going to have poverty interest groups. You're going to have obesity interest groups. You're going to have smoking. You're going to have reproductive rights interest groups because of what Obamacare included. You're going to have anti-reproductive rights interest groups. All across the board, one policy, huge input. It's not a triangle anymore. You think of a triangle and then you add another point. Then what are you going to have? 1 point? Yeah, okay, yeah, sure. You have 4 points now, which apparently is a hexagon. Then you add another one. Then another one. And they're all connected. I mean, think of all your relationships there. It's a network now. It's not a triangle. So while an iron triangle is our beginnings of it, it's just too simple. Things have kind of boomed out because of the nature of media and the fact that it's not just 1, 2. It's not just 1, 2, 3. And it's because of those competing wants. We talked about the struggle too between what the president is able to do, and this is going to be a continual issue with with Trump, is the relationship between the agencies and him, because his support within agencies is not very high, certain agencies. So depending on how he deals with that, it's going to be a focus because they can pick the heads in most cases, but once they're picked, there's a lot of independent thinking within each agency. So those interest groups, they get their input and they accomplish stuff. That's kind of how it works. They accomplish stuff by getting involved with both the agency, getting involved with the committee, and that's where the policy happens. Any questions about interest groups before we hit the last page? We good? Or interest groups and iron triangles, I guess. Okay, tomorrow we'll come back to this and focus on the fact that bureaucracies are not just unchecked. Number one, we know of legislative oversight. So you started with committees in your daily activities, right? Looking at committees for who had control of your makeup. Well, what agency has control of your makeup? Do you remember what you found? The FDA. What committee has oversight of the FDA? They are the Food and Drug Administration. So what type of a committee do you think in Congress would have control over them or oversight? Committee on Health. There you go. So a Committee on Health would. And when they have oversight, this is what they're able to do. These three items. Number one, it's pretty powerful if they can close you and say you're no longer needed. That's a pretty powerful thing. So that's option one. But then option two is they can also create an agency. So for instance, let's use the NSA. If they're tired of the NSA not doing their job, whatever, they could just create another agency and give them all of the responsibility. So both cases are checks on what that original agency did. Second, actually, it's keep them together, kind of. They can appropriate funds, but then they also authorize funds. What's the difference between the two? What is the difference between authorization and appropriation?
Give up or they allot a certain amount of money that the agency can spend, and then also they determine how the agency spends it.
Perfect. Appropriations means I'm going to give you $20 billion to go do your thing. So they decide how much money they get. They get appropriated. But before that, they have to say, yeah, okay, I'm okay with you spending $10 billion on a frog study down in Louisiana. That sounds like a good use of government funds. Or, even better, a toilet for NASA that flushes the appropriate way, because otherwise you would feel homesick in space. So it's a natural feeling for that to happen, which is true. I suppose looking out the window and the fact that you see space would be a little bit indicative of a homesickness. But the toilet saves lives. So they authorize the spending. They can authorize all they want. If they don't actually appropriate the funds, you're not going to have the money to spend. So there is a difference there, very connected. And typically, the appropriations one is kind of just a blanket, envelope. Here you go. This is your total amount of money. The authorizations have to continually kind of come up. So, yep, go ahead. That sounds fair. And the less they have to actually authorize, if it's like a yearly authorization, whatever, or maybe even longer than that, that would mean that agency has more what in terms of power when they get to decide how they're going to spend it. What did we call that yesterday? Discretionary authority, where they get to decide, yep, that's a good idea. That's how I'm going to choose to spend my money. Now, the last one down here was a huge check from a government agency. So what that would be is they would have given some sort of discretionary authority. Like, let's say to the FCC. And they would say, okay, go regulate the broadcasts. And thinking back to the Super Bowl with Janet Jackson and her wardrobe malfunction. What happened to live events after the Super Bowl? Like, if you were to watch this year's Super Bowl, were you actually watching it live? It's delayed by 10 seconds. Okay? So they make that policy. The FCC makes that policy. Congress didn't. So when the FCC makes that policy, Let's say for some reason there's some member of Congress who is like, that's the stupidest thing ever. I'm not going to watch my TV when I live right next door to the stadium and know that a touchdown happened 10 seconds before it happened and not know why. This is the worst policy ever. We're going to veto it. Well, they already told the FCC that they can do those things. So then because they didn't like what the FCC did, they were trying to just say, nope, that's not going to be a policy. The Constitution didn't allow that. And they were doing it for a very long time until the 1980s when they ruled that those were unconstitutional. So legislative vetoes can't happen anymore. They were deciding things when they had already been approved for the agencies to do it. So now we have to talk about the fact that people don't like the bureaucracy and why. A few of them we've already mentioned, but they have tried to change a lot. Now, with the attempts that have been happening, I think Michael brought it up yesterday. Yeah, you were the one who said it. What did Trump say he was going to do when it came to regulations from the bureaucracy? Policies for the bureaucracy. You said it. You're not going to say it again.
Everything policy.
Paul?
I want to take 2 away.
If you add a policy, you have to take 2 away. Now, from like what that means, it makes sense. But in terms of reality, well, you could have one policy that's extremely difficult and take away 2 minor ones, and it doesn't really balance out. But the point is there needs to be changes. There needs to be change. So a lot of them are about it's currently happening, the reforms. Noah brought up yesterday. What are the reforms related to employees? Attempts that are currently. No, just in general, like what were you bringing up yesterday?
Oh, they're trying to remove the restriction on fire.
Trying to make it a lot easier to fire a bureaucrat. Trying to make it a lot easier to fire a member of the bureaucracy. So those are kind of what the reforms entail, but they're extremely difficult because it is a battle between the executive branch, meaning not just the president, but also the agency, and then the oversight committee. Because those people who have jobs in government, most of them are there because they agree with what they're doing. So if you work for the FCC, you probably like communications. If you work for the EPA, you probably like the environment. So they are going to fight to defend their agency. The president, in control of those, is going to have the consistent kind of battle defense, I guess, kind of area where they have to defend to the congressional committee that they're worthwhile. So the reforms attached to those those agencies, it becomes very difficult for any type of reform to happen. Now, with the reforms, one of the biggest ones that we talked about first thing yesterday was, how do most people in the bureaucracy get their jobs? Aaliyah, what do they have to do? What do most people have to do if they work for the bureaucracy? Pass a merit exam. They have to prove that they're worthy. That is a very new thing. Well, not a very new thing, but it's a new thing in terms of the beginning of our country. Because what they used to go by was that patronage. You talked about it yesterday. The spoil system is what they called it, where there was just a consistent turnover. So they would basically take the entire government, kick everybody out when a new president came in, and put in their friends. So the inefficiency in that is pretty clear. You have a completely new system. Every 4 years, there's going to be some serious downtime, some slowdown. And it took until this time for it to occur, the Pendleton Act. And that focused on the fact that patronage was too common, too disruptive for our government. So Garfield gets shot. Why? Why did Garfield get shot?
Because of a dissatisfied office seeker, which the book called a lunatic.
A lunatic. Well, he shot the president because he didn't get a job. I would classify him as a lunatic as well. But
he didn't die until almost 2 months after they shot him, and then it took them like 6 hours to dig the bullet out, and then they were digging in the wrong spot, so they didn't get the bullet out even at all because it went all the way through. Isn't that neat?
Happened to me once.
I'm so glad Charles is here.
I am too.
Yeah, it was a dissatisfied government worker. who thought he deserved a job. But Garfield came in, as usual, kicked everybody out, gave people the positions that he wanted. So somebody was upset and shot him because of it. So then it's the beginning of the end of the spoils system. So that was the focus. Now, another side, and this is actually coming up a lot right now, is the Hatch Act. If you work for the government, you can't influence anything with politics. And I shouldn't say politics. You can't influence political activities, elections, campaigns. So one of the big talking points before the election, when the FBI director released his letter saying that they had found new emails about Hillary Clinton's emails. I guess that sounds kind of weird. When they found emails about Hillary's, whatever. When he sent the letter to Congress, did he violate the Hatch Act? There are individuals who are coming out working in government right now talking about how they are not going to support Donald Trump. And I don't mean like, we talked yesterday about the distance that actually there's a little bit of distance between Trump and the agencies, right? I'm saying like re-election. They're talking that they're not going to support him there. So when they do that, do you think that's a violation of this? It is. I would say yes. I mean, I don't care if it's saying you will support him or you won't. That's a violation of this. And most of them right now are saying that they're not. That is a violation of that. It's a little bit different today because it's, just because you work for the government doesn't mean you don't have First Amendment rights. However, when you're working in the capacity of the government, there are certain First Amendment rights that you lose. Similar to you guys. When you are a student outside of the building, you have all of your First Amendment rights. When you are an athlete, at any point representing the school, whether that means wearing an Owasso swimming shirt or on a bus. Yeah, I'm thinking of you, Ireland. It doesn't matter. You don't have your same First Amendment rights because in that capacity you are an athlete. So there's a big difference there. Same thing with this, going on what civil liberties you maintain as a part of your job. Now, right here, we're now looking at 5 criticisms. 5 big criticisms of the bureaucracy and why it needs to change. Well, here we go. First, looking at how big they are. What causes the bureaucracy to grow? Now, I don't want the 2 because that's not where I was going. You can give me those 2. But what causes an agency to develop? A what? A problem. Well, we have a lot of problems. So it just continues to grow. And the two big problems have been the economy and war, the Great Depression and World War II. But, whoops, how did we already go to the end? There we go. Jeez. Are you kidding me? What the? We'll get there, sort of. Okay, well, just talking about them, that's ridiculous. I don't want to hear that, Bernard. Quiet. This isn't a fun time right now. There we go. Problem solved. So the criticism, okay? Beyond just that balloon where the president is asking how everybody's doing and then everybody has to feel like they have to justify the position and defend themselves. These are our 5 big criticisms. Okay, red tape. I've had that on, I think, 3 different slides by now. Talking about red tape. What that means is when you want something to get done, it doesn't. It doesn't get done because you have to go talk to the Department of Agriculture. Well, you actually need to go to the small town rural division, which isn't an actual division. But you do need to go to the canned foods division. Oh, wait a minute. But then you also need to go talk to the dairy division. So it's just a constant struggle for actually getting something done where who is in control of that given situation. So it becomes rather difficult and lengthy. Conflict is another big one. You have 2 agencies who have different goals. So for instance, the EPA's focus is protection of the environment. Then you have government agencies in charge of mining for fossil fuels. Those are a little bit in conflict. So when you have different agencies that have different goals in conflict with one another, they sometimes slow each other down, but then they become ineffective as well. Duplication, agencies do the same thing. What does the NSA do? What does the NSA? First off, I guess. So what do? What do they focus on? Good. What does the CIA do? About specific place is. It's different than the FBI. I mean, they do the same thing, but different locations. Around the world. The FBI is local, is domestic. CIA is foreign. Okay, so foreign intelligence for national security. All right, what does the Department of Homeland Security do? They focus on Homeland Security. That's a little bit of duplication. They have kind of condensed them into the Department of Homeland Security, actually, but that is duplication. Agencies doing the same thing. Then waste. When you look at that in the book, the examples they give are just extreme. How much wasted money they have. And I've given you some examples, but a lot of it comes down to earmarks. A lot of it comes down to earmarks where they give out money to different government agencies. The one I showed you way back at the beginning of the year was that National Security Agency in that town in Pennsylvania where they didn't even know what they did. Nobody knew what this government agency did, but they existed for what reason? Somebody had passed a bill as an earmark creating this agency. So that's one where they just spend and spend and spend. And why it's problematic is how much of an oversight it would take to minimize that. You know, think about the Food and Drug Administration. What are they in charge of? Beyond food and drugs, like what do they do with drugs specifically? Let's do that one. They don't sell drugs. Regulate not just how they are sold, but they regulate if they are healthy enough to use in the United States. So they have to go through all these trials, and they have to prove it. Well, when they start that process, they have no idea how much it's going to cost. So how are you going to know at the end how much it's going to be? There would have to be somebody consistently checking the books to make that work. Then last one, similar, but a little bit different, is they just go. There's no check in terms of how big they become, how powerful they become. And that is a concern for a lot of reasons. You know, I brought up Rick Perry's slip up in the Republican primaries about what departments they were going to close. Why? Because government is getting huge. The government is getting big. One of the big criticism right now, and this isn't like this is just kind of a talked about figure. Hacken would probably be able to give it to you exactly, but he always claims, and I mean I give a lot of weight to what Hacken says, even though sometimes it's Hacken. For every dollar that we pay in taxes, the government spends $1.60. So if you know your math, something doesn't equate there. Because what are we going to have to do? Sell money isn't really that much of an option, Brendan. We don't get to print more money either. So then we become more in debt to China, and our debt continues to grow. Now, these are real criticisms. These are real criticisms, and that is why